with me now!
November 14, 2023, 2:47 p.m. Security cameras at Westridge Academy captured something that would change everything. A 52-year-old teacher, Miss Patricia Hendricks, had her hand clamped around the arm of 14-year-old Amara Williams, dragging her down the hallway like a piece of luggage. Amara's screams echoed off the lockers. Students poured out of classrooms, phones already recording. Teachers stood frozen, watching but not intervening. And Amara, this brilliant, quiet freshman, was being pulled across the floor, her sneakers squeaking as she tried to dig in her heels, her voice breaking as she screamed the words that would go viral within hours. "Let me go. You're hurting me." But here's what nobody in that hallway knew. What Miss Hendricks definitely didn't know as she yanked that child down the corridor. Amara's mother was about to walk through those school doors. And when she did, everyone responsible for what happened to her daughter would lose everything. That morning had started like any other Tuesday for Amara Williams. Her alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. in the modest two-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother on the east side of town. She moved quietly through her morning routine, careful not to wake her mom who'd worked a late shift the night before. Amara stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down her uniform, the crisp white shirt and navy blazer that marked her as a student at Westridge Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. She was 14 years old, a freshman, and one of only 12 black students in a school of 800. Let that sink in for a moment. 12 out of 800. Amara had earned her spot at Westridge through a scholarship, awarded for her exceptional talent in art. Her bedroom walls were covered with her drawings, sketches that showed a maturity and skill far beyond her years. African masks rendered in intricate detail. Portraits of her mother that captured not just her features but her strength. Abstract patterns inspired by traditional textiles she'd studied in books borrowed from the library. Every morning, Amara packed that worn leather sketchbook into her bag. It went everywhere with her. Her constant companion. Her safe space. Before she left, her mother appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, eyes soft with sleep. She walked over and kissed Amara's forehead, holding her daughter's face between her hands. "Remember who you are," she said. It was what she always said. A reminder. An anchor. Amara nodded, shouldered her backpack, and headed out into the cold November morning. She walked 3 blocks to catch the city bus. The ride took 45 minutes, cutting across town from the modest neighborhood where rent was affordable to the tree-lined streets where homes had circular driveways and 3-car garages. Amara watched through the bus window as the scenery changed, the small shops giving way to boutiques, the apartment complexes becoming mansions set back from the road. The bus dropped her 2 blocks from school. She walked the rest of the way, arriving just as the parking lot filled with luxury cars. BMWs, Mercedes, Teslas. Parents in designer sunglasses kissing their kids goodbye. Students laughing with friends, completely comfortable, completely at home. Amara pulled her jacket tighter and walked through the front doors alone. Her first class of the day was art history with Miss Patricia Hendricks. Room 203. Amara climbed the stairs, her stomach already tight with that familiar nervousness that had become part of her daily routine at Westridge. Miss Patricia Hendricks had been teaching at Westridge Academy for 20 years. She was 52 years old, with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a way of looking at students that made them feel examined, judged, and usually found wanting. She wore her authority like armor, speaking to her students with a condescension that had calcified over 2 decades of never being challenged. Her classroom reflected her tastes exactly. The walls were covered with reproductions of European Renaissance masterpieces. Botticelli, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Caravaggio. Not a single piece of art from any other culture. Not one. Amara took her usual seat in the 3rd row, trying to make herself small. Miss Hendricks stood at the front of the class, writing on the board in her precise script, "Classical Beauty Standards, a Study in Renaissance Ideals." She turned to face the class. "Today we begin our unit on the foundations of aesthetic philosophy in Western art. You'll each be creating a presentation on the classical standards of beauty as exemplified by the great masters of the Renaissance period." Amara's hand went up slowly. Miss Hendricks' eyes slid toward her with barely concealed irritation. "Yes, Amara?" She mispronounced the name deliberately, though Amara had corrected her at least a dozen times since September. It was Amatra. 3 syllables. Not difficult. "I was wondering," Amara said, her voice quiet but steady, "if we could include other artistic traditions in the project? Like African art? There are incredible examples of beauty standards in African masks and sculptures, and in Asian art too, and—" Miss Hendricks cut her off with a thin smile. Miss Williams were studying real art history, the foundations of Western civilization, the masterworks that have defined human aesthetic achievement. Perhaps you can explore your interests in an elective course. Real art history. The words hung in the air like a slap. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One girl, Madison, glanced at Amara with something like sympathy. But nobody said anything. Nobody ever did. Amara's grip tightened on her pencil. She could feel heat rising in her chest, but she nodded and looked down at her desk. Miss Hendricks continued with her lecture, pointing to images projected on the screen. The Renaissance masters understood proportion, symmetry, the divine ratio. They elevated art from mere craft to philosophical inquiry. But Amara had stopped listening. She opened her sketchbook to a blank page and began to draw. Not the Renaissance paintings on the screen. Not the alabaster faces and flowing robes. Instead, her pencil moved across the paper, creating the angular beauty of an African mask she'd seen in a book. The geometric patterns that held centuries of meaning. The bold lines that Miss Hendricks would never call classical, but that represented traditions just as ancient, just as sophisticated, just as real. It was her quiet rebellion. Her way of saying, "You're wrong. My culture matters. My art matters. I matter." For about 20 minutes, Miss Hendricks paced the front of the classroom, her voice droning on about perspective and chiaroscuro. And then she stopped, mid-sentence. Her eyes had landed on Amara, on the movement of her hand across the page, on the fact that this scholarship student wasn't hanging on her every word. The room went quiet as Miss Hendricks walked down the aisle. Her footsteps were deliberate, slow. When she reached Amara's desk, she stood there looming until Amara looked up. "Are you paying attention, Miss Williams, or are you doodling?" Before Amara could answer, Miss Hendricks reached down and snatched the sketchbook right off her desk. Just took it. Grabbed it like she had every right to Amara's personal property, to her private thoughts made visible. Amara's breath caught. "That's mine?" But Miss Hendricks was already flipping through the pages. Her expression shifted from irritation to something uglier. Disgust. She held up the current page, the African mask that Amara had been drawing, and her lip actually curled. "This primitive nonsense has no place in my classroom." Primitive. The word landed like a punch. Around the room, students froze. Even the ones who usually tuned out everything could feel that something had just crossed a line. Amara stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor. Her heart was hammering, but her voice came out clear. "That's racist. Those are traditional African art forms. They're not primitive. They're culturally significant and—" Miss Hendricks' face flushed deep red. Her voice rose. "How dare you accuse me of racism? I will not tolerate this insubordination." "I'm not being insubordinate. You called my art primitive. You. Give me back my sketchbook." Amara reached for it. Miss Hendricks yanked it away. And in that moment, in that tug-of-war over a 14-year-old's art, pages tore. The sound of ripping paper cut through the tension like a scream. Amara looked at her torn drawings, at months of work damaged, and something broke inside her. Her voice cracked. "You had no right to touch my property." Miss Hendricks slammed the sketchbook on the desk. "I have every right. You're being disruptive and disrespectful, and you're coming with me to the principal's office right now. Not until you apologize for what you said." The standoff lasted maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds where a teacher could have de-escalated. Could have recognized that she'd gone too far. Could have seen the hurt in this child's eyes and chosen compassion. Instead, Miss Patricia Hendricks walked around the desk and she grabbed Amara Williams by the upper arm. Her fingers dug in hard enough to leave marks. Hard enough that Amara gasped. "You're coming with me now." And then she pulled. She dragged Amara toward the classroom door. Amara tried to pull away, her sneakers sliding on the polished floor, her free hand grasping at desks for support. She stumbled. Nearly fell. Miss Hendricks didn't let go. Didn't loosen her grip. Didn't stop. They burst through the classroom door and into the hallway. Other classroom doors opened. Students poured out, drawn by the commotion. Teachers stepped into the corridor and then froze, as if they couldn't quite process what they were seeing. Miss Hendricks dragged Amara down that hallway. 20 feet. 30 feet. And Amara was screaming now, her voice echoing off the lockers. "Let me go. You're hurting me. Someone help me." Phones came out. Dozens of them. Recording. Capturing every second. The timestamp would later show 2:47 p.m. November 14, 2023. And somewhere across town, Amara's mother was sitting in a board meeting when her phone buzzed with a call from Westridge Academy. If you're feeling that anger rising in your chest right now, if you're wondering how this could possibly happen in 2023, hit that subscribe button because this story is just getting started. What happens next will leave you speechless. Let me ask you something, and I want you to comment below. Have you or someone you know ever experienced racism in a school setting? How was it handled? Because what you're about to hear about how Westridge Academy initially responded to this incident will make your blood boil. But first, we need to talk about who Amara's mother really was. Because Ms. Hendricks and Principal Ashford had no idea who they were dealing with. Vice Principal Marcus Chin heard the screaming from his office on the second floor. He'd been at Westridge Academy for 8 years and he knew the sounds of a school. This wasn't normal. This was panic. This was fear. He ran. By the time he reached the hallway, a crowd had formed. 30, maybe 40 students, all with their phones out, all filming. And in the center of it all, Miss Patricia Hendricks had her hand locked around Amara Williams' arm, and Amara was crying, trying to pull away, her voice hoarse from screaming. Miss Hendricks, let her go. Chin's voice cut through the chaos. He wasn't asking. He was commanding. Hendricks released Amara's arm like she'd been burned. Amara stumbled backward, catching herself against the locker, cradling her arm against her chest. Her face was streaked with tears. Her breathing came in ragged gasps. Chin stepped between them, his hands raised. Everyone back to class. Now. He turned to a teacher standing frozen in her doorway. Mrs. Patterson, call the school nurse. Tell her we need her immediately. The students dispersed slowly, reluctantly, still whispering, still recording. The videos were already uploading. Already being shared. Within minutes they'd be on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. Within hours they'd be everywhere. Chin looked at Amara. The red marks on her arm were already starting to darken into bruises. Finger-shaped bruises. Amara, are you hurt? Can you walk? She nodded, but she was shaking. Trembling like a leaf in a storm. Miss Hendricks, go to the main office. Wait there. Do not speak to anyone. Chin's voice was ice. Hendricks opened her mouth to protest, but something in his expression stopped her. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the floor, her back rigid with indignation. The school nurse, Mrs. Okonkwo, arrived within minutes. She was a Nigerian immigrant in her 50s, warm and efficient, with kind eyes that had seen too much. She took one look at Amara and her expression shifted from concern to something harder. Anger barely contained. Come with me, sweetheart. Her accent was soft, her touch gentle as she guided Amara down the hall to the nurse's office. Chin followed. He needed to document this. He needed photographs. He needed a statement. Because he already knew where this was heading and he needed evidence. In the nurse's office, Mrs. Okonkwo carefully examined Amara's arm under the harsh fluorescent lights. The bruises were clear now. 4 distinct marks where fingers had dug in. A thumbprint on the inside of her arm. Mrs. Okonkwo's jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone and took photographs from multiple angles, making sure the timestamp was visible. Can you tell me what happened? She asked gently, pulling up a chair to sit at Amara's level. Amara's voice shook as she recounted everything. The art project. The suggestion about African art. Miss Hendricks calling it primitive. The sketchbook being torn. The refusal to apologize. The grab. The drag. Mrs. Okonkwo listened to every word, and when Amara finished she sat back in her chair. Her face had hardened into something carved from stone. This isn't the first time, she said quietly. Amara looked up, confused. What? Miss Hendricks. This isn't the first time she's done something like this. Not the physical part but the rest of it. The dismissiveness. The racist comments disguised as academic standards. Mrs. Okonkwo shook her head. I've been here 6 years. I've treated 3 other black students who came to me in tears after her class. I filed reports. Nothing ever happened. Chin, standing by the door, felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed was different. I'm going to call your mother now, he said to Amara. And then we're going to make sure this is handled properly. Down the hallways of Westridge Academy, the whispers spread like wildfire. Did you see it? Did you get the video? I can't believe she actually dragged her. That's assault. That's going to be everywhere. Someone's getting fired. Students clustered in bathroom stalls and empty classrooms, watching the videos over and over, sharing them with friends at other schools, adding captions, adding commentary. The story was already escaping the building, taking on a life of its own. 15 miles away, in a glass and steel tower in the heart of downtown, Dr. Jasmine Williams sat at a conference table on the 42nd floor. She was 42 years old, though she could pass for younger. She wore a charcoal gray power suit tailored to perfection, her natural hair styled in elegant locks that fell past her shoulders. Around the table sat 8 other executives, all reviewing quarterly projections on massive screens. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it. An unknown number. She ignored it and turned her attention back to the presentation. It buzzed again. Same number. She frowned slightly but kept her focus on the meeting. The CFO was explaining something about market volatility. Important. Third buzz. She picked up the phone, ready to silence it, and saw the caller ID, Westridge Academy. Her heart stopped. Schools don't call 3 times in a row unless something is wrong. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. She stood, phone in hand, and walked out of the conference room. The door whispered shut behind her. The hallway outside was empty, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city stretching out in every direction. She answered. "This is Dr. Williams." "Dr. Williams, this is Vice Principal Marcus Chin from Westridge Academy. I'm calling about your daughter, Amara." Her entire body tensed. "Is she hurt? What happened?" "She's physically okay, but there's been an incident. A teacher, a physical altercation. Amara was removed from class by force. She has bruising on her arm." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. "What do you mean she was physically removed from class?" Chin took a breath. She could hear him choosing his words carefully. "A teacher grabbed her and dragged her out of the classroom. It was witnessed by approximately 30 students and caught on video. The school nurse has documented bruising consistent with forceful grabbing." Jasmine's vision narrowed. The city below her seemed to tilt. "Who?" "Ms. Patricia Hendricks, the art history teacher." Jasmine knew that name. Amara had mentioned her. The teacher who mispronounced her name. Who dismissed her suggestions. Who made her feel small. Her voice, when it came out, was deadly calm. The kind of calm that people who knew her understood as a warning. "I'm on my way." She ended the call. Stood there for a moment in that empty hallway 42 floors above the city, her reflection ghosted in the window. Then she turned and walked back into the conference room. 8 faces looked up at her. "I need to leave. Family emergency." She gathered her things, her movements controlled, precise. "Jasmine, we're in the middle of," the CFO started. "Cancel my afternoon. Reschedule everything." She was already at the door. Then she paused, turned back. "Actually, cancel the rest of my week." She walked past her office. Past the nameplate on the door that read, Dr. Jasmine Williams, Chief Operating Officer, Meridian Holdings. Down the hall to the elevator. She pressed the button for the parking garage and pulled out her phone. "This is Dr. Williams. Clear my schedule for the next week." "Yes, everything. Something's come up with my daughter." She paused. "Also, I need you to pull all documentation related to Westridge Academy. Board meeting minutes, investment reports, disciplinary procedures, everything we have. Email it to me within the hour." The elevator descended. Jasmine stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors and thought about the promise she'd made to herself 15 years ago when Amara was born. Jasmine had grown up in the same modest neighborhood where she and Amara still lived. Her mother had been a hospital janitor. Her father had left when she was 6. She'd gone to underfunded public schools where teachers were overworked and resources were scarce. But she'd been brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. She'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through community college, then transferred to a state university, then somehow, impossibly, got accepted to Stanford for her PhD in business administration. The academic world had been brutal. She'd been the only black woman in most of her classes. Professors who questioned whether she'd written her own papers. Study groups that excluded her. A thesis advisor who suggested she might be more comfortable in a less rigorous program. She persevered. Graduated top of her class. Entered the corporate world and climbed a ladder that seemed designed to shake her off at every rung. The microaggressions. The being talked over in meetings. The having to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. She'd made it anyway. Built a career. Built a life. Built a future for her daughter. When Amara was young, Jasmine had kept her in public school deliberately. She wanted her daughter to grow up grounded, connected to her community, understanding where she came from. But in 8th grade, Amara had been accepted to Westridge Academy on a full scholarship for artistic merit. And she'd begged her mother to let her go. "Mom, they have an amazing art program. Real studios. Teachers who are actual artists. Please." Jasmine had hesitated. She knew what places like Westridge were like. She'd been in enough boardrooms, enough country clubs, enough exclusive spaces to know how her daughter would be seen. How she'd be treated. but Amara had been so hopeful, so excited. And Jasmine had thought maybe it would be different. Maybe times had changed. Maybe her daughter wouldn't have to experience what she had experienced. She'd been wrong. As she drove across the city toward Westridge Academy, Jasmine's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The promise she'd made 15 years ago echoed in her mind. My daughter will never go through what I went through. I'll make sure of it. I'll protect her. And she'd failed. Some protection. Some promise. Her jaw set. Her eyes hardened. The polished, diplomatic executive melted away, replaced by something older, fiercer. A mother whose child had been hurt. By the time she pulled into the Westridge Academy parking lot 25 minutes later, she knew exactly what she was going to do. Inside the main office, Principal Robert Ashford sat behind his massive oak desk, rubbing his temples. He was 63 years old, white, with thinning gray hair and a face that had settled into comfortable privilege over 15 years at Westridge. He'd built his career on not making waves, on keeping donors happy, on maintaining the school's reputation. This was a wave. This was a tsunami. Miss Hendricks sat across from him, arms crossed, her face flushed with indignation. Robert, that girl accused me of racism in front of my entire class. She was completely out of line. Vice Principal Chen stood by the window, his expression carefully neutral, but his hands were clenched behind his back. Patricia, Ashford said slowly, you grabbed a student. You dragged her out of your classroom. There's video. I gently escorted her to avoid further disruption. She was being aggressive and disrespectful. Patricia, there's video, Chen repeated, his voice tight. Hendricks waved a dismissive hand. Taken out of context. These phones capture 30 seconds and everyone thinks they know the whole story. That girl has been a problem since September. Constantly challenging my curriculum, questioning my expertise. Ashford shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He didn't want to deal with this. He wanted it to go away. We need to handle this quietly. We'll suspend Miss Williams for 3 days for insubordination. Patricia, you'll receive a written warning for inappropriate physical contact with a student, and you'll attend a professional development session on classroom management. Chen's head snapped toward Ashford. You're going to suspend the victim? Robert, she was assaulted by a teacher. Let's not use inflammatory language, Marcus. Patricia used poor judgment, yes, but the girl did provoke her. She accused her of racism, for God's sake. She was called primitive. Her art was called primitive. Hendricks scoffed. I said the drawings were primitive in style, which they were. I was describing an artistic technique. You know exactly what you meant, Chen said quietly. Ashford raised a hand. Enough. This is my decision. 3-day suspension for the student, written warning for Patricia, and we move on. This school has a reputation to maintain. Miss Hendricks sat back in her chair, a small, smug smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She'd been protected before. She'd be protected now. 20 years of tenure. 20 years of connections. 20 years of knowing exactly how the system worked. Chen looked at them both and felt something break inside him. He'd been fighting this battle for 8 years. Filing reports. Raising concerns. Being overruled again and again. Not this time. I'm documenting my objection to this decision, he said. And if Mrs. Williams asks for my account of what happened, I'm telling her everything. Ashford's expression hardened. That sounds like a threat, Marcus. It's a promise. The front office of Westridge Academy was designed to impress. High ceilings, crown molding, leather furniture arranged around a coffee table bearing the school's crest. Framed photographs lined the walls showing championship sports teams, honor societies, distinguished alumni. The receptionist sat behind a curved desk of polished wood, a orchid arrangement beside her computer. The doors opened. Dr. Jasmine Williams walked in. She moved with the kind of presence that made people look twice. Not hurried, not frantic, but absolutely purposeful. Her heels clicked against the marble floor. Her face was composed, but there was something in her eyes, something in the set of her shoulders, that radiated controlled fury. The receptionist glanced up from her computer, then back down, then up again, really looking this time. Can I help you? I'm here for my daughter, Amara Williams. Recognition flickered across the receptionist's face. The incident. Right. Oh, you'll need to wait. There's a process. Principal Ashford is currently in a meeting and... Dr. Williams leaned forward slightly, placing her hands on the desk. Her voice was quiet. Deadly quiet. Get Principal Ashford. Now. Something in her tone, in the absolute certainty of it, made the receptionist reach for the phone immediately. Yes, ma'am. Right away. While they waited, Jasmine looked around the waiting area. Really looked. The photographs on the walls told a story. Championship soccer team, 2022, 23 students, 21 white, 2 Asian. Honor Society inductees, 2023, 38 students, 36 white, 2 students of color. Distinguished alumni display, 15 faces, 15 white faces. On the coffee table sat a glossy brochure, Diversity and Inclusion at Westridge Academy. She picked it up. Stock photos. Generic promises. Beautiful words meaning nothing. Her expression hardened further. The receptionist hung up the phone. Principal Ashford will be right with you, Mrs. Dr. Williams. Dr. Williams. I'm sorry. Can I get you some water while you wait? No. Jasmine sat down in one of the leather chairs, crossed her legs, folded her hands in her lap. To anyone watching, she looked perfectly calm. Perfectly collected. But inside she was calculating. Planning. Remembering every board meeting she'd attended for the past 3 years. Every investment report she'd read. Every policy she'd reviewed. Every connection she'd made. Because what Principal Ashford and Ms. Hendricks didn't know, what nobody at Westridge Academy except the board of directors knew, was exactly who they were dealing with. And they were about to find out. If this story is making you feel something, if you need to see justice served, make sure you subscribe, because what happens when this mother walks into that principal's office will restore your faith that sometimes, the right person has the power to change everything. Here's my question for you. Have you ever witnessed someone in authority abuse their power and get away with it? What would you have done in Dr. Williams' position? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation matters. The door to the principal's office opened. Principal Ashford appeared, his professional smile already in place, his hand extended for a shake. But when he saw the woman sitting in his waiting room, something in her posture, something in the way she stood and looked at him, made that smile falter just slightly. Mrs. Williams? I'm Principal Ashford. Why don't you come to my office so we can discuss this unfortunate situation? Dr. Jasmine Williams picked up her purse, smoothed her suit jacket, and followed him down the hallway, her heels clicking like a countdown to judgment. Principal Ashford's office was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood paneling. Diplomas in expensive frames. A shelf full of leather-bound books that had probably never been opened. A window overlooking the perfectly manicured grounds of Westridge Academy. The office of a man who'd grown comfortable in his authority, who'd never really been challenged. When Jasmine walked in, the first thing she saw was Amara. Her daughter sat in a chair against the wall, looking small in a way that made Jasmine's heart crack. Amara's eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her uniform was disheveled. And when she looked up and saw her mother, her face crumpled. Jasmine crossed the room in 3 strides. She pulled Amara into her arms, holding her tight, one hand cradling the back of her daughter's head. I'm here, she whispered. I'm here now. She pulled back, gently taking Amara's arm. The bruises were clearly visible now. 4 dark marks where fingers had dug in. A thumbprint on the soft inside of her forearm. Jasmine's jaw tightened as she examined them, her fingers barely touching the discolored skin. Amara winced. Behind them the office door opened. Principal Ashford entered, followed by Vice Principal Chen. And behind them, Miss Patricia Hendricks walked in like she owned the place, her chin high, her expression one of barely concealed irritation at having to deal with this at all. Ashford moved around his desk, that professional smile back in place, his hand extended. Mrs. Williams, I'm Principal Ashford. Thank you for coming so quickly. I know this has been upsetting, but I'm confident we can resolve this matter in a way that... Jasmine didn't take his hand. She didn't even look at it. Her eyes stayed locked on his face, and her voice cut through his pleasantries like a blade. Where's the incident report? Ashford's hand dropped. His smile flickered. We're still gathering information. The incident only occurred about an hour ago, and we need to speak with witnesses, review the facts. My daughter has bruises on her arm. Where's the police report? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Police report? Ashford repeated, confusion crossing his face. Mrs. Williams, I don't think we need to involve law enforcement in what is essentially a disciplinary matter. A disciplinary matter? Jasmine's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. My daughter was physically assaulted by a teacher. That's not a disciplinary matter. That's a crime. Ms. Hendricks made a sound of exasperation. She stepped forward, waving a dismissive hand. This is being blown completely out of proportion. I was attempting to remove a disruptive student from my classroom after she became verbally aggressive and... Jasmine's eyes cut to her. The look she gave Ms. Hendricks could have frozen lava. I don't believe I was speaking to you. Silence fell over the office like a heavy blanket. Ms. Hendricks' mouth opened, then closed. She'd been a teacher for 20 years. She was used to commanding rooms. Used to being listened to. Used to being respected. The dismissal hit her like a slap. Vice Principal Chen stood near the door, his arms crossed, watching everything with an expression that suggested he was taking mental notes. Good. Principal Ashford cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. He gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. Why don't we all sit down, take a breath, and discuss this calmly? I'm perfectly calm, Jasmine said, still standing. My daughter was assaulted by your employee on school property. I'd like to know what you're going to do about it. Ashford sat down behind his desk, trying to use the furniture to reassert his authority. Mrs. Williams, I understand you're upset. Any parent would be. But your daughter was being disruptive in class. She accused Ms. Hendricks of racism, refused to follow instructions, and created a scene that. So you physically assault her? The question hung in the air. Ashford's face reddened. That's not what I said. I'm trying to provide context for what happened. These situations are rarely black and white. Vice Principal Chen moved for the first time since entering the room. He walked to the desk and placed his phone on the polished surface, screen facing up. His finger tapped the screen. Video began to play. The sound filled the office. Students' voices. Gasp. And above it all, Amara's screams. Let me go. You're hurting me. The video showed everything. Miss Hendricks' hand locked around Amara's arm. The way she dragged the girl toward the door. Amara stumbling, trying to pull away. The rough handling. The complete lack of care or concern. It was clear. It was undeniable. It was horrifying. Jasmine watched with an expression that looked carved from stone. But her hands, resting on the back of Amara's chair, were trembling. White-knuckled. Shaking with the effort of maintaining control. 15 seconds. 20. 30. The video kept playing. Turn it off, Jasmine said quietly. Chen stopped the video. The silence that followed was deafening. Jasmine turned to Principal Ashford. Her voice was soft now, which somehow made it more terrifying. You're going to tell me this was appropriate? You're going to tell me my daughter deserved this? Ashford shifted in his chair. Uncomfortable. Trapped. Of course it wasn't appropriate. Ms. Hendricks used poor judgment in how she handled the situation. But context matters, Mrs. Williams. Your daughter did provoke. What context justifies a grown woman dragging a child down a hallway? The softness was gone now. What provocation makes this acceptable? Tell me. I'm listening. Ashford had no answer. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked to Ms. Hendricks for support. Hendricks stepped forward, her voice defensive. That video doesn't show what happened in the classroom. It doesn't show her disrespect, her insubordination, her accusation of racism that. Were her accusations accurate? The question stopped Hendricks cold. Did you or did you not call African art primitive? I was describing an artistic style. Yes or no? Did you call her artwork primitive? Hendricks' face flushed. The technical term in art history for certain non-Western styles is. That's a yes. Jasmine turned back to Ashford. So my daughter was accurate. She called out racism and was punished for it with violence. Is that what happens at Westridge Academy? Ashford rubbed his face with both hands. This was getting away from him. He needed to offer something. Needed to make this go away. Mrs. Williams, I want to assure you that we take this extremely seriously. We're prepared to offer Amara a week off to recover, fully excused absences. She won't fall behind in her coursework. We'll provide tutoring if needed. And we'll ensure this never happens again. And Miss Hendricks? Jasmine asked. What happens to her? Miss Hendricks will receive a written warning for inappropriate physical contact with a student. She'll also be required to attend mandatory sensitivity training and professional development on classroom management. Jasmine laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound with absolutely no humor in it. Sensitivity training. She repeated the words like they were a joke. And maybe they were. Miss Hendricks bristled. I've dedicated 20 years to this institution. I've taught hundreds of students. I've won teaching awards. My record speaks for itself. Jasmine's eyes locked on her. And how many black students have you traumatized in that time? How dare you? How many have sat in your classroom and felt exactly what my daughter felt? How many have you dismissed, belittled, othered? Hendricks sputtered, her face turning red. I treat all my students equally. Mrs. Okonkwo mentioned this isn't the first incident. The room went absolutely still. You could have heard a pin drop. Ashford and Hendricks exchanged a look, quick and panicked. Jasmine saw it. She'd spent 20 years in boardrooms reading people's faces, interpreting glances, catching the moments when people revealed more than they meant to. How many complaints have been filed against Ms. Hendricks? She asked, directing the question to Ashford. I don't have that information in front of me. How many? Ashford shifted papers on his desk, avoiding eye contact. A few over the years. Nothing substantiated. Students sometimes misinterpret. How many black students have filed complaints against this teacher? The silence was answer enough. Jasmine pulled out her phone. She tapped a few times, composing herself, gathering her thoughts. When she looked up, her face had hardened into something absolutely immovable. She stood, placing both hands flat on Ashford's desk, leaning forward. Here's what's going to happen. You will terminate Ms. Hendricks immediately. Today. Right now. Ashford blinked, shocked. Mrs. Williams, I understand you're upset, but you can't dictate personnel decisions. That's not how this works. You can't just walk in here and... Then I'll take this to the school board. The board will side with us, Ashford said, his voice rising slightly, defensive now. Ms. Hendricks has tenure. She has union protection. There are procedures that must be followed. You can't just... Jasmine straightened. She pulled out her phone again, held it up. Then I'll take it to the media. I'll give them the video. I'll give them the complaints you've buried. I'll give them everything. Ashford went pale. You're threatening the school? I'm protecting my daughter. And every student who comes after her. Every black student who shouldn't have to experience what she experienced. What others have experienced. What you've allowed to happen for years. Ms. Hendricks had been standing silently, watching this exchange with growing anger. Now she stepped forward, her voice dripping with contempt. You think you have power here? You think you can march in and make demands? You're nobody. You're just another parent trying to excuse your daughter's bad behavior by playing the race card. The words hung in the air like poison. Jasmine turned to look at Ms. Hendricks. Really look at her. And then she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a predator gives before it strikes. You have no idea who I am, do you? She reached into her purse. Pulled out a business card. Walked over to Ashford's desk and slid it across the polished wood surface. Ashford picked it up. Read it. And the color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. His hand started to shake. The card trembled between his fingers. Chin, from his position by the door, leaned forward slightly, curiosity evident on his face. Miss Hendricks frowned. What is it? Ashford's voice came out as barely a whisper. You're Dr. Jasmine Williams. From Meridian Holdings. I'm sorry, what? Hendricks stepped closer, trying to see the card. Chen's expression changed. Recognition dawned. He knew that name. He knew what it meant. Jasmine's voice was calm. Matter of fact. Meridian Holdings is Westridge Academy's largest institutional investor. We hold 42% of the school's endowment. I'm the chief operating officer. And I sit on your board of directors. The office fell into complete silence. The kind of silence that happens when the world suddenly tilts on its axis and everyone needs a moment to adjust to the new reality. Amara looked at her mother with wide eyes. Mom? Jasmine glanced at her daughter, her expression softening for just a moment. I kept it quiet because I wanted you to have a normal school experience, baby. I didn't want you treated differently because of who I am or what I do. She turned back to Ashford. I've been on this board for 3 years. Anonymous. Quiet. Watching. Waiting to see if you'd address the problems I saw in every report, every statistic, every complaint that crossed my desk. Ashford had gone from pale to gray. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Ms. Hendricks looked between them, confusion and fear starting to replace her earlier smugness. That doesn't give you the right to. Actually, Jasmine interrupted, her voice sharp as glass. It does. I sit on the board that oversees this institution. I have access to every record, every report, every piece of documentation about what happens in this school. Including the complaints filed against you that Principal Ashford here decided weren't worth pursuing. She pulled her phone out again. I had my assistant email me everything while I was driving here. Would you like to know what I found? Nobody answered. She didn't wait for permission. 2019. Marcus Johnson's parents filed a complaint. You accused their son of plagiarizing an essay about black artists in the Harlem Renaissance. Turns out he hadn't plagiarized anything. You just couldn't believe a black student could write that well. Ms. Hendricks opened her mouth to protest. 2020, Keisha Turner. Another complaint. You told her that urban culture had no place in discussions of fine art. Her parents pulled her from your class. 2021. 2 more complaints. Both from parents of black students. Both dismissed after what Principal Ashford called thorough investigation. Except there was no investigation, was there, Robert? Ashford couldn't meet her eyes. 4 complaints. 4 black students. 4 times you were protected. 4 times the school chose comfort over justice. Jasmine's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her controlled exterior. And today my daughter became number 5. She leaned forward again, her hands flat on the desk. So here's what's actually going to happen. Miss Hendricks, you're done here. Finished? I'm calling an emergency board session for this afternoon. Every board member will see that video. Every board member will see the pattern of complaints. And you will be terminated. With cause. No severance. No recommendations. Nothing. Hendricks' face had gone from red to white. You can't do that without proper procedure. I absolutely can. And I will. Jasmine turned to Ashford. And you? You have 2 choices. You can resign today with a severance package and a neutral reference. Or I can present everything I have to the board and you'll be terminated for cause for enabling and covering up discriminatory behavior for years. Your choice. You have until 5 o'clock today to decide. I've built this school, Ashford started, his voice weak. You've run it into moral bankruptcy while maintaining its pristine reputation. Those aren't the same thing. Ashford slumped in his chair, looking suddenly much older than his 63 years. Vice Principal Chen spoke for the first time in minutes. Dr. Williams, for what it's worth, I've documented every objection I've raised. Every complaint I thought should have been taken seriously. I have files. Jasmine looked at him, really looked at him, and nodded. I know. I've read your memos. You've been trying to fix this for years. She paused. How would you feel about being the new principal of Westridge Academy? Chen's eyes widened. I'm going to need someone who actually gives a damn about all the students in this school. Someone who's proven they'll fight for what's right even when it's uncomfortable. You interested? Yes, Chen said immediately. Absolutely yes. Ms. Hendricks found her voice one more time, desperate now. This is insane. You're destroying careers over one incident. Over 5 incidents that we know about, Jasmine corrected. Over a pattern of behavior that's been allowed to continue because people like Principal Ashford found it easier to look the other way than to confront it. Over a system that protects teachers like you at the expense of students like my daughter. She picked up her purse. Helped Amara to her feet. The board meeting is at 4 o'clock. I expect both of you there. And I expect your resignations on the table. She walked toward the door, her arm around Amara's shoulders. Ashford called after her, his voice breaking slightly. What about the school? Losing a principal and a senior teacher mid-year? Think about the students. Jasmine stopped. Turned back. I'm thinking about the students. All of them. That's more than either of you have done. She walked out, Amara beside her, Chin holding the door open for them. In the office behind them, Principal Ashford sat at his desk, staring at the business card that had just destroyed his career. Ms. Hendricks stood frozen, finally understanding that her 20 years of protection, her tenure, her connections, meant absolutely nothing. Because the parent they just dismissed, the woman they tried to placate with a week off and sensitivity training, wasn't just another concerned mother they could manage and dismiss. She was the person who could fire them all. And she was about to do exactly that. If you're sitting there thinking, finally someone held them accountable, then hit that subscribe button right now because this story is about to show you what real justice looks like when the right person has the power to make it happen. And trust me, what happens in that board meeting will make you stand up and cheer. Let me ask you this. Do you think Dr. Williams went too far, or did she do exactly what needed to be done? Should there be mercy for people like Ms. Hendricks and Principal Ashford, or does protecting future students matter more? Drop your honest opinion in the comments because I want to know where you stand on this. The war had just begun. And this mother was going to win it. The business card sat on Principal Ashford's desk like a grenade with the pin pulled. His hands trembled as he held it, reading it over and over as if the words might change. But they didn't. They stayed exactly the same. Dr. Jasmine Williams, Chief Operating Officer, Meridian Holdings. His voice came out strangled, disbelieving. You're Dr. Jasmine Williams. From Meridian Holdings. Vice Principal Chen looked confused, glancing between Ashford's ashen face and the composed woman standing before them. Oh, what's Meridian Holdings? Ashford couldn't take his eyes off the card. Meridian Holdings is Westridge Academy's largest institutional investor. They hold the majority of our endowment. They're the reason we can afford our facilities, our programs, our... His voice trailed off as the full implications hit him. Jasmine's voice was calm, almost conversational. 42% to be precise. We acquired the position 3 years ago as part of our education portfolio. I personally oversee the investment. The energy in the room shifted so dramatically it was almost physical. Like the air pressure had changed. Like gravity had reversed. Ms. Hendricks, who'd been standing with her arms crossed in defensive indignation, suddenly looked uncertain. Chin straightened up, paying attention in a completely different way now. And Ashford looked like he might be sick. Ms. Hendricks found her voice, though it lacked the confidence it had held moments before. That doesn't give you the right to come in here and make demands. You're still just a parent and this is still a school matter. Actually, Jasmine interrupted, her voice cutting clean through Hendricks' protest. It does give me the right. I don't just hold 42% of your endowment. I sit on your board of directors. Half for 3 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Amara, still standing beside her mother, looked up with wide, confused eyes. Mom? Jasmine glanced down at her daughter, her expression softening just for a moment. I kept it quiet, baby. I didn't want you treated differently because of who I am or what I do. I wanted you to have a normal school experience. I wanted you to make friends based on who you are, not whose daughter you are. I wanted you to succeed or struggle on your own merit. Her voice caught slightly on that last word. I wanted to protect you from what I went through. She looked back at Ashford and the softness vanished, replaced by something harder than diamond. I see now that was a mistake. Ashford was scrambling now, his professional composure completely shattered. He stood up from behind his desk, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Dr. Williams, if we'd known who you were, if we'd had any idea. You would have what? Jasmine's voice cracked like a whip. Treated my daughter with basic human dignity? Protected her from a racist teacher? Actually investigated complaints instead of burying them? Tell me, Robert. What exactly would you have done differently if you'd known? Ashford opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. That's what I thought, Jasmine said quietly. Because the answer is everything. You would have done everything differently. And that's the problem. My daughter shouldn't need to be the daughter of someone powerful to be treated with respect. No child should. She walked slowly back to Ashford's desk, and this time he actually took a step back, like her presence was something physical, something dangerous. She placed both hands flat on the polished wood and leaned forward. For 3 years, I've watched this school's diversity reports. Do you know what they show? Ashford shook his head mutely. Jasmine reached into her leather bag and pulled out a folder. A thick folder. She'd come prepared. Of course she had. She opened it on the desk, pages covered in charts, statistics, highlighted passages. 12 black students currently enrolled at Westridge Academy. Well, out of 800 students. That's 1.5%. She let that number hang in the air. 7 years ago, there were 31 black students enrolled. 31. What happened in 7 years that caused a 60% decline in black enrollment? Ashford stammered. Demographic changes in the area, application numbers, scholarship funding. Yes, let's talk about scholarship funding. Jasmine flipped a page. Your scholarship program funding has been cut by 60% over the past 7 years. 60%. The scholarships that allowed students like my daughter, students from families that couldn't afford $35,000 a year in tuition, to attend this school. Cut. Almost eliminated. She flipped another page. Here's another interesting statistic. Disciplinary actions against students of color are 3 times higher than white students for identical infractions. 3 times. A black student gets suspended for talking back. A white student gets a warning. A black student gets detention for dress code violations. A white student gets sent back to class. You see the pattern, Robert? Vice Principal Chen was listening intently now, his arms no longer crossed, his body leaning forward. This was information he'd suspected but never had confirmed, never had documented so clearly. Ashford was sweating. Actually sweating. Small beads forming on his forehead. Dr. Williams, I'm sure there are explanations for these discrepancies. There are. The explanation is systemic bias. The explanation is that this school has been slowly, quietly becoming less diverse, less inclusive, less welcoming to students of color. And you've either been too incompetent to notice or too complicit to care. Jasmine's voice rose slightly, the professional veneer cracking to reveal the fury beneath. I've been documenting everything. Every report. Every statistic. Every complaint that crossed my desk as a board member. I've been watching. Waiting. Hoping you'd correct course on your own. She closed the folder with a sharp snap. Today proved you won't. She turned to Ashford, and her eyes were absolutely merciless. Mrs. Okonkwo mentioned there were other incidents involving Ms. Hendricks. Other complaints. I want to see those files. Now. Ashford's face went from red to pale. Dr. Williams, those are confidential personnel matters. I can't just. I'm on the board of directors. Those files are not confidential from me. Get them. Now. The command in her voice left no room for argument. Ashford looked at Chin, a desperate, pleading look. Chin walked to the filing cabinet in the corner of the office. He unlocked it with a key from Ashford's desk drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Personal Hendricks P. He brought it to the desk and placed it in front of Jasmine. She opened it. Started reading. Her expression grew darker with every page. 2019, she read aloud. Complaint filed by the parents of Marcus Johnson, Jr. at the time. Ms. Hendricks accused him of plagiarism on an essay about black artists during the Harlem Renaissance. Claimed the writing was too sophisticated for him to have written himself. Jasmine looked up. Investigation revealed he hadn't plagiarized anything. He'd written every word himself. He was a straight-A student with a 4.0 GPA. She turned a page. Resolution. Ms. Hendricks required to issue written apology. No further action taken. Another page. 2020. Complaint filed by the parents of Keisha Turner, sophomore. Ms. Hendricks told her in front of the entire class that urban culture had no place in discussions of fine art. That hip-hop and street art were not legitimate forms of artistic expression. Jasmine's voice was steady, but her hands gripped the folder tightly enough that the pages crinkled. The parents requested Keisha be moved to a different art class. Request granted. No disciplinary action taken against Ms. Hendricks. Ms. Hendricks spoke up, her voice defensive, desperate. Those students were oversensitive. They took academic criticism as personal attacks. I'm not finished, Jasmine said without looking at her. She turned another page. 2021. 2 more complaints. Both filed within 3 months of each other. David Washington, freshman. Ms. Hendricks repeatedly mispronounced his name despite corrections, made comments about his natural rhythm when discussing music history. Ashley Robinson, sophomore. Ms. Hendricks suggested she'd be more comfortable in a vocational program rather than pursuing fine arts. She closed the folder and looked directly at Ms. Hendricks. 4 complaints in 3 years. 4 black students. 4 incidents of you making them feel unwelcome, inferior, other. And in every single case, the resolution was minimal. An apology. A transfer. A slap on the wrist. Nothing that would actually change your behavior or make you examine your biases. Those students were oversensitive, Hendricks repeated, her voice rising now. I treated them exactly the same as everyone else. If they chose to interpret everything through the lens of race. 4 complaints, Jasmine repeated, her voice cutting through Hendricks' protests. 4 black students. All dismissed. All minimized. You see the pattern? Because I do. And so will the board. She turned to Ashford. You knew about these complaints. Every single one crossed your desk. You read them. You conducted what you called thorough investigations. And in every case, you did nothing meaningful to address the problem. We followed proper procedure, Ashford protested weakly. We interviewed witnesses, we spoke with Ms. Hendricks, You protected a racist teacher because confronting it was uncomfortable. Jasmine's words landed like hammer blows. Because she has seniority. Because she's been here 20 years. Because she brings in donations from wealthy alumni who appreciate her classical approach to art history. Because taking real action would mean admitting you have a systemic problem. Ashford stood there, silent, caught. There was no defense he could mount that wouldn't damn him further. Vice Principal Chen spoke up for the first time in several minutes. His voice was quiet but firm. Dr. Williams, for what it's worth, I pushed for stronger action every time. After every complaint. I wrote memos. I requested meetings. I advocated for more substantial consequences. He glanced at Ashford. I was overruled. Every time. Jasmine looked at Chin, really looked at him, and nodded slowly. I know. I've read your memos. Ashford's head snapped toward Chin. You went over my head? You reported to the board. I documented my objections, Chin said calmly. It's my job. I'm the vice principal. When I see patterns of concerning behavior being inadequately addressed, I document it. I did exactly what I was supposed to do. Ashford looked betrayed, but he had no ground to stand on. Chin had followed protocol. Ashford was the one who'd failed. Jasmine pulled out her phone, checked the time, then looked back at the two people who just had their world turned upside down. Her voice was absolutely steady now, absolutely certain. Here's what happens now. Miss Hendricks, you're terminated. Effective immediately. You're done at this school. Hendricks gasped, her face going white. You can't do that without board approval. There are procedures. I have tenure. I have union protection. I called an emergency board session from the parking lot, Jasmine said calmly. It starts in 2 hours. Every board member will see the video of you dragging my daughter. Every board member will see these complaint files. Every board member will see the pattern. And then they'll vote to terminate you. With cause. Which means no severance. No recommendations. Nothing. She turned to Ashford. And you? You have 2 choices. You can resign today, right now, with a severance package and a neutral reference that will allow you to find another position somewhere else. Or you can attend that board meeting and I will present everything I have, every document, every statistic, every buried complaint, and you'll be terminated for cause for enabling and covering up discriminatory behavior for years. Ashford's voice came out as barely a whisper. I've built this school. I've been here 15 years. I've raised millions in donations. I've improved test scores, college acceptance rates. You've run it into moral bankruptcy while maintaining its pristine reputation on paper, Jasmine said. You've built a beautiful facade over a rotting foundation. Those aren't the same thing. She crossed her arms. You have until this meeting ends to decide. Resign with dignity or be fired with cause. Your choice. Ashford sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years and then some. The board won't support this, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. It was the last gasp of a drowning man reaching for a lifeline he knew wasn't there. Jasmine smiled and it was terrifying. Robert, 3 board members are already in the parking lot. I called them on my way here. They've seen the video. They've seen the complaints. They're furious. So here's my question for you. Do you really want to bet your career on the hope that the board will side with you over me? The silence stretched out. Long, painful. Ashford slumped forward, his elbows on his desk, his head in his hands. Defeat was written in every line of his body. What about the school? He asked finally, his voice muffled. Losing a principal and a senior teacher mid-year? What about the students? The disruption? The chaos? Jasmine's expression didn't soften. You should have thought of that before you enabled abuse for years. You should have thought of that before you protected a teacher with multiple complaints against her. You should have thought of that before you made this school a hostile environment for students of color. She picked up her bag, put the folders back inside, straightened her jacket. The school will survive. Students are resilient. And honestly, it'll be better off without both of you. She held out her hand to Amara, who took it immediately. Her daughter's hand was small in hers, trembling slightly. The board meeting is at 4 o'clock, Jasmine said. Conference room B. I expect to see both of you there. And Miss Hendricks, I'd suggest you bring your union representative. You're going to need them. She walked toward the door. Chin moved to open it for her. But before she left, Jasmine turned back one more time. One more thing. This conversation, everything that was said in this room, is being documented. Mr. Chin witnessed it. Mrs. Okonkwo will provide her statement. The nurse's report, the photographs of my daughter's injuries, the video, the complaint files, all of it will be presented to the board. All of it will be on the record. She looked at both Ashford and Hendricks. You don't get to hide from this. You don't get to make this go away quietly. Not this time. And then she walked out, her daughter beside her, leaving behind 2 people whose careers had just ended, whether they were ready to accept it or not. In the hallway outside, Jasmine kept walking, kept her composure, her head high, her shoulders back. But inside, her heart was hammering. Inside, she was shaking with rage and pain and the awful realization that she'd failed to protect her daughter from the very thing she'd spent her whole life fighting against. Amara looked up at her mother as they walked. Mom, why didn't you tell me? About being on the board? Jasmine stopped walking. Knelt down to her daughter's level, despite the expensive suit, despite being in the middle of a school hallway. She took Amara's face in her hands. Because I wanted you to just be a kid. I wanted you to make friends and learn and grow without the weight of who I am hanging over you. I wanted you to be seen for who you are, not whose daughter you are. Her voice broke slightly. I thought I was protecting you. I see now I was wrong. Amara's eyes filled with tears. It's not your fault, Mom. You didn't know she'd. I should have known. I did know. I saw the statistics. I read the reports. I knew this school had problems. And I thought I could change it from the inside, slowly, carefully, without disrupting your life. Jasmine pulled her daughter into a tight hug. I was wrong. I should have acted sooner. They stood there in that hallway for a long moment, mother and daughter, holding on to each other. And then Jasmine pulled back, wiped the tears from Amara's cheeks, and stood up. But I'm acting now. And I promise you, baby, what happened to you will never happen to another student at this school. Never again. She took Amara's hand and they walked out of Westridge Academy together. Behind them, in that office, Principal Ashford sat at his desk, staring at the business card that had destroyed everything he'd built. Miss Hendricks stood frozen, finally understanding that her 20 years of protection meant nothing. That her tenure meant nothing. That her connections meant nothing. Because the woman they'd dismissed as just another concerned parent, the woman whose daughter they'd brutalized and blamed, wasn't powerless at all. She held all the power. And she was about to use every bit of it. If you believe in accountability, if you believe that people in power need to face consequences when they abuse it, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now. Because what happens in that board meeting is going to be the most satisfying thing you've ever witnessed. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Here's what I want to know from you. Do you think Dr. Williams should have revealed her position earlier, or was she right to wait and document everything first? Would you have done anything differently in her situation? Let me know in the comments, because this is a conversation we all need to be having. The board meeting was in 2 hours. And it was going to change everything. 2 hours after that video stopped playing, the real consequences began. An emergency board meeting was convened in the same conference room where Jasmine had sat silently for years. Every board member was present this time. No one wanted to miss this. The video played again. All 47 minutes of it. And as it played, you could watch the faces of these powerful, influential people transform. The disgust wasn't performative. It was real. Because seeing it all laid out like that, hearing a child beg for her mother while grown adults looked on, watching a principal lie directly to a board member's face, there was no spinning this. There was no making this palatable. When Susan Hendricks tried to defend herself, her voice cracking as she insisted she was just following protocol, just maintaining standards, just doing her job, the room went cold. Because everyone in that room now understood what just doing her job had meant. What it had always meant. The vote for termination with cause was unanimous. No severance package. No glowing recommendation letter. Just an immediate removal and a legal team already drafting statements to protect the school from the lawsuits that were surely coming. Richard Ashford offered his resignation before anyone could ask for it. He'd read the room. He knew his time at Westridge was over. The board accepted it without discussion, without thanks for his years of service. Just a cold acceptance and a request that he clear out his office by end of business day. Chen was named interim principal, effective immediately. And then came the moment that would define everything that followed. One board member, Patricia Worthington, old money and older attitudes, suggested they handle this quietly. Keep it contained. Issue a private statement to affected families. We don't need to air our dirty laundry publicly, she said, her voice carrying that tone of practiced diplomacy that really meant, let's protect ourselves first. Jasmine's voice cut through the room like a knife. No. We're issuing a public statement acknowledging what happened and our failures. Full transparency. Full accountability. Patricia's face reddened. That will damage our reputation. Our reputation should be damaged, Jasmine said, her voice steady and unflinching. We earned it. We built a system that traumatized children and we upheld it for decades. If our reputation survives this intact, then we haven't learned anything. The statement went out that afternoon. By the next day the video had gone viral. Millions of views. Shared across every platform. Local news stations picked it up first, then national outlets. Cable news panels debated it. Think pieces flooded the internet. Westridge Academy's name was everywhere, and for all the wrong reasons. But here's what's crucial. Westridge didn't hide. They didn't issue a standard PR non-apology. They acknowledged their systemic failures. They announced a comprehensive review of all disciplinary practices going back 10 years. They committed to rebuilding the diversity programs they'd gutted. They published the demographics showing they'd gone from 87 black students to 19. They owned it all. And then something unexpected happened. Parents of former students started coming forward. Black families who'd pulled their children out years ago, who'd been told their kids were discipline problems, or not a good fit. Asian families whose children had been praised for being naturally good at math, but discouraged from creative pursuits. Latino families who'd been recruited for diversity statistics then made to feel invisible. The stories poured in, dozens of them, then hundreds. Each one a small variation on the same theme. We thought it was just us. A national conversation erupted about racism in private schools, about the myth of colorblind meritocracy, about what happens when institutions prize their reputation over their students' humanity. Amara's face became a symbol, though her family worked hard to shield her from the spotlight. She hadn't asked to be the face of anything. She'd just asked to call her mother. 1 week after that board meeting, Amara was at home with Jasmine. Her mother had taken the week off from work, something she'd never done before, not even when Amara had pneumonia in 4th grade. But this was different. This required presence, not just provision. Amara was seeing a therapist twice a week, processing trauma that had compacted itself into her body during those 47 minutes in Hendrix's office. The nightmares had started on day 3. The panic attacks when anyone raised their voice came shortly after. One afternoon, sitting together on the couch, Amara asked the question that had been building in her since she'd seen her mother storm into that office. "Why didn't you tell me you were on the board?" Jasmine had been expecting this. She'd prepared an answer, rehearsed it even. But when the moment came, the rehearsed words felt hollow. "I wanted you to build friendships based on who you are, not who I am," she said finally. "I wanted you to have something that was just yours, untouched by my influence or my position. I wanted to protect you from what I went through when I was your age, from always wondering if people liked you or for what you represented." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." Amara looked at her mother, really looked at her, and for the first time since the incident, something softened in her eyes. "You did protect me," she said quietly. "You fought for me. When it mattered, you fought." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that holds space for healing. "Will you go back to Westridge?" Jasmine asked, afraid of the answer either way. Amara's face clouded with uncertainty. "I don't know. Everything feels different now. Even thinking about those hallways makes my chest tight." "Then we'll figure it out together," Jasmine promised. "Whatever you decide, I'll support it." 3 months passed. 3 months of intensive institutional transformation that was unprecedented for a school like Westridge. Because here's the thing about public shame. When it's done right, when it's coupled with genuine accountability, it can be a catalyst for real change. The new principal was Dr. Yolanda Martinez, a Latina educator with a 20-year track record of reforming exclusive institutions from the inside out. She turned down higher-paying positions at schools that wanted her to be their diversity fig leaf. She only went where she had real power to make real change. Westridge gave her that power. A full-time diversity coordinator was hired. Not a part-time consultant. Not a committee that met quarterly. A full-time position with a real budget and real authority. The curriculum was overhauled. Art history classes now included African, Asian, Indigenous, and Latin American art traditions, not as footnotes but as foundational content. Literature classes expanded beyond the traditional Western canon. History classes confronted uncomfortable truths about American racism, not in a single February unit but woven throughout the year. The scholarship program was restored and expanded. Aggressive recruitment efforts in underserved communities. Full-ride offers for exceptional students who couldn't afford the tuition. The results were already visible. Current Black student enrollment, 47 students. Not back to where it had been but climbing. The school felt different, sounded different, looked different. Support groups for students of color were established. Safe spaces where they could process their experiences without having to educate their white peers about racism. 101. And yes, there was mandatory anti-racism training for all staff. But not the performative check-the-box kind. Actual substantive programming that required self-examination, discomfort, and ongoing commitment. Amara decided to return. It wasn't an easy decision. There were other schools, fresh starts where no one knew her story. But something in her wanted to see if Westridge could really change. Wanted to be part of that change if it was real. Her first day back, her stomach was in knots. But walking into her art class, she was greeted by a new teacher. Mr. Thompson, a Black man in his 40s who specialized in global art traditions. His classroom walls were covered with artwork from 6 continents, every style and medium imaginable. He welcomed Amara warmly, without pity, without the hushed, careful tones that some teachers had adopted around her. "I've heard you're quite the artist," he said. "Would you be willing to show me your sketchbook sometime?" Amara hesitated, then pulled it out. The African-inspired drawings she'd been working on, geometric patterns and bold figures, the work she'd been told wasn't real art. Mr. Thompson studied them carefully, his face brightening with genuine appreciation. "These are extraordinary," he said. "The way you're blending traditional Ndebele patterns with contemporary portrait work, this is sophisticated stuff. Would you like to showcase them in our new diversity exhibition next month? We're featuring student artists who draw from their cultural heritage." For the first time since that day in Hendrix's office, Amara smiled. Really smiled. "I'd like that," she said. The school assembly came 2 weeks later. Westridge announced a new scholarship program in Amara's name, specifically for students of color pursuing arts education. She'd initially resisted having her name attached to it, uncomfortable with being made into a symbol. But Dr. Martinez had sat with her and explained that sometimes our stories, as painful as they are, can open doors for others. "You didn't choose to be in this position," Martinez had said. "But you are in it. The question is what we do with it. This scholarship can help kids who face what you faced. Kids who are told their art doesn't matter, their culture doesn't matter, they don't matter." So Amara agreed. Standing at the podium now, looking out at hundreds of faces, she felt her heart hammering. Public speaking had never been her thing. She was an artist, someone who expressed herself through images, not words. But then she found her mother's face in the back of the auditorium. Jasmine stood there, tears already streaming down her face, giving Amara a small nod of encouragement. Amara took a deep breath and spoke. "What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone. But it does. Every day. In schools like this across the country." Her voice grew stronger. "Change only happens when people with power decide comfort is less important than justice. My mom had power and she used it. But she shouldn't have had to. She shouldn't have had to choose between her daughter and her position. That choice shouldn't exist." She gripped the podium. "We all have power. Even when we don't think we do. We can all choose to stand up. To speak up. To refuse to accept things the way they've always been just because that's how they've always been." The applause started small, then built. Then people were standing. Teachers, students, parents, board members. A standing ovation that went on for nearly 2 minutes. Amara stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed. Dr. Martinez squeezed her shoulder as she passed. "You did beautifully," she whispered. After the assembly, Amara walked the hallways with a small group of friends. A truly diverse group now, not the forced diversity of photo ops but genuine friendships built on shared experiences and mutual respect. She walked with her head held high, her sketchbook under her arm, no longer afraid that someone would question her right to be there. No longer wondering if she belonged. Because she did belong. She always had. The final image, if this were a film, would freeze on her face. Confident, peaceful, no longer carrying the weight of an entire institution's failures on her young shoulders. One person's courage can change everything. Before you go, I need you to do something important. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because stories like Amara's need to be told, need to be shared, need to be remembered. And I need your help spreading them. Now here's my question for you. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly in a school or workplace setting? Did you speak up or do you wish you had? Share your experience in the comments below. Between 2015 and 2020, Black students were nearly 4 times more likely than white students to receive out-of-school suspensions for the same infractions. Black girls specifically are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. These aren't just statistics. They're children. They're Amaras in classrooms across this country right now, being told through 1,000 small cuts that they don't belong, that their culture doesn't matter, that their pain isn't real. Change happens when we refuse to look away. Change happens when we decide that protecting children matters more than protecting reputations. Change happens when people with power use it. Share Amara's story. Share your story. Because one person's courage can change everything.